Welcome to another episode of Safe Space, the podcast for next-gen family business leaders. Today we're joined by, I'm a professional speaker, by the way, people. We're joined by John Michael Elder out of Spearfish, South Dakota. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So before we get started, can you maybe share with the audience a little bit about you, your role in the family business, a little bit of history of the family business, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, I am a third generation married-in family member to our family office. My wife is from here in Spearfish, South Dakota. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, and we made our way back here 4 years ago in the middle of COVID, and had no clue what I was going to find myself in the middle of 4 years later. So, the family office or the family business from years before, my grandfather-in-law was a banker in North Dakota. In his mid 60s, had a liquidity event, sold the banks, and moved to Spearfish here, where he then invested in real estate development. And that was kind of his second career that started in his 60s. He had three daughters. All three daughters were married, and all three son-in-laws came and worked in the business. So I would say I just kind of followed the pattern by joining the family business here. Coming in, I thought I was just going to be in real estate development, and here I am, the president and CIO of our family office, which is called Wellspring Family Group. And that just it naturally happened because I did not enjoy real estate sales that much, but found out I had a knack for the organizational component, and stepped into what I didn't realize at the time was two different generational transfers happening simultaneously. So that's how we got here where we are right now.
Very, very cool. So let's dive right in.
Sure.
Let's tackle the issue of being married into a family business or family of one. Let's go right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what was it like, when you got married, all happy, blah, 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 it's great. And you're still happy now, right?
Of course.
So what was it like coming into this dynamics, this thing called the family business?
Yeah. So I would say on the front end, I had no idea. I remember visiting my would-be in-laws at the time, and they live in a pretty modest middle-class home. And, I visited the office, and it's built in the 90s, a lot of oak trim, nothing modern and fancy. And
Right.
so I just okay, just similar to, I grew up with my grandparents had a marina that they owned for 40 years, family owned. And so I just kind of slotted it mentally into that this is their marina.
Right.
And so then after getting married, I distinctly remember I was a pilot at the time, and I remember asking their thoughts on how much we should be putting into our 401k. I had got some rumblings that there was some wealth in the family, and so I just was kind of asking, how much should we be contributing? They're like, I don't think you probably need to contribute that much. And I was like, oh, what does that mean? Like, that could mean anything. And so that was the first kind of thread that poked itself out, and I just took that and started pulling. And so marrying in wasn't this event that I think maybe happens in the movies when somebody marries into a wealthy family, and it's like they show up to the wedding, they're so out of place because of difference in socioeconomic status or something. It wasn't that for me as much as I pulled on the thread, I was like, oh, there are a lot of things happening behind the scenes here, a lot of responsibility that I was unaware that we had as a couple, as a family. So yeah, I would say just a different process of joining the family business.
So for the audience listening, a couple things that pop out from these. Number one, don't be afraid to pull on the thread. Like, just be naturally curious, right? And number two, you are part of the family. You married in, you're part of the family. It's a we, it's not them versus I, which I hear a lot from spouses.
Yeah, I think, uniquely to my family, incredibly welcoming family. This is kind of the dream in-laws that you would want And so I, that helps to create comfort and space to feel able to ask those questions. I can imagine that it would be trickier if there was more of like a taboo around certain subjects or things like that. But
Yeah.
absolutely, pulling on the thread helped. In my mind, I was only pulling on it because I was like, I want to make a plan for my family and our
Right.
future. And so, if there's information that I need to know, the only way I'm going to find it is to ask.
So another thing that's coming up for me, John, is don't be afraid to ask.
Hmm.
Like just you have a family, your nuclear family. You as a man, as a spouse, you want to look after, right?
Absolutely.
So it's just normal to ask the questions.
Hmm. Yeah, and then what comes of that is where it can be more fun. Is I would say, um, in our direct family, my wife's parents, they were very open. It's when it started to get further back in branches, aunts and uncles and grandparents that are involved in the business. There's a kind of necessary skepticism to, okay, where are these questions coming from, and what is maybe the angle? And so that I learned through time. You have to really, I had to kind of state my intentions and make what I was looking for clear. It wasn't, hey, I'm looking for, the closet that has all the cash in it or whatever. I'm just trying to make the best decisions for our family, and how can I plan knowing that there are, things in place, structures in place for intergenerational transfer of assets and wealth. And um that, I think, for our particular family was new. I'm not the first married, and I think there were four families that were married before me. Um, and so I might have, though, been the first one that kind of from the spouse or the in-law standpoint started asking some specific questions.
Yeah, and again, John, your intention was, how can I plan for my family? There wasn't any shame, there wasn't any guilt. You're just being curious because what I hear a lot from spouses is, I don't want to step over toes, I don't want to be misinterpreted,
Hmm.
and it's just about saying, I'm asking because of this, whatever this is.
Yeah. And there was a lot, I mean, I had those feelings, like, as I was pulling on that thread, there were definitely moments where I'm like, I don't know. I remember distinctly, every year we have a family meeting. They've been doing this for years before our family office ever existed. Um, and I remember the first one that I attended was kind of like a presentation, but not much interaction with that third generation. Um, and I remember in that first one having a lot of questions, but not asking any because I was like, I'm just feeling the culture out here, and none of these third generations are asking questions. So I'll hold those, write them down, take them to my direct in-laws, and start to ask those questions. Thankfully, over the next year, as they gave me permission and pointed me to the right people to ask the right things, um, I then felt comfortable in the next year's meeting to start to ask questions in front of the group. Part of that too was having discussions with other Generation 3 members and helping helping them to see as well why I'm asking the questions, and they're thinking, oh, that might be helpful for us to understand as well. So it definitely wasn't just a unicorn of like, oh, it all just fell into place and it was great.
Yeah, here's
They
my list of
welcomed
questions,
my
please answer them.
questions. Yeah.
Right.
So,
Okay, so how did
yeah.
how did how did that evolve into your current role and how you're
Yeah.
contributing and adding value to the family?
Yeah, so that quickly transitioned into the why behind our what. So we, um, my wife has three siblings, and my wife's family is very mission oriented, and they give away their lives not just through financial means, but in ministry through their time and talents. And so, um, as I was pulling on the thread and information was coming out, I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I wonder what her older sister's family is doing with that information and how they've prepared. And so I go talk to them, and they're like, oh, we didn't know that, or we're not really thinking about it. And like, oh, okay. And then her other two siblings are younger than her. and not married, and earlier in life, still figuring some things out. And so um, I went to my in-laws and said, "Hey, okay, what are you guys, doing to prepare with this information? How are you utilizing it to do plant?" And they're like, "We're just kind of doing our thing, like we're just going along." And so I quickly realized, okay, there's a need for somebody to step into this space to kind of plan efficiently how to manage and steward the wealth as these intergenerational transfers were happening. There, all along, it's all been seen as, wow, this is such a blessing, it's incredible, and that's helpful to have that perspective. But if you don't then go forth and say, oh, with that blessing there's a ton of responsibility that needs to be bore, like, I don't think you're stewarding that money well. You're letting it happen to you. And so um that was the why we got to the what of our family office, which is, okay, how can I leverage my um desire for education, desire to understand these things and then make a plan around them? How can I leverage that, not just for the good of my nuclear family, but one layer out for my wife's nuclear family? And um, that's how we got to here is, okay, I can help them give their lives away more effectively, more efficiently, if I can help them to not avoid, um, to address some of the responsibilities that would then eat away time that they could be using for the things that they're passionate about.
So you come into the family from a perspective of, with an open heart, looking to contribute, not seeing it as a burden.
Yeah, definitely not a
Talk through
burden.
that, because what happens is a lot of folks don't realize that wealth can be a burden.
Absolutely.
As a client of mine says, privilege can crush.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
How did you, and what kind of advice could you offer someone to not look at it as a burden, but a privilege that you can be responsible with?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's kind of two. I'm sure there's a lot more than two, but I see it as two choices. Is you can either say, okay, I'm going to avoid that burden by just foregoing the wealth. And you can do that through, a number of means. You could just kind of move it to the next generation that's coming in a trust and you just forego it, or you could give it all away, or there's ways to just, I don't want the responsibility, so I'm going to just not deal with it.
Right.
Or if you don't do that, it is going to happen to you. I think that was something that I wasn't aware, coming from the family and background that I came from, that like wealth is an inevitability, um, in a way. And so how you frame your approach to that inevitability is exactly what you're saying. It's like, I can dread the responsibility that's going to come from it, or I can say, oh, wow, there are tons of opportunities that I have that others won't have. I could have all sorts of feelings about whether I deserve those opportunities or not. That's another conversation. But the what I do have is the opportunity. And so do I seize it and then leverage it for the best outcome for my family and my wife's family and generations to come? Or do I kind of wither into the feelings of inadequacy? One of the best things I was pointed to was an article about the difference in identity from um, being a maker or an inheritor, or like the different kind of places within the wealth making process. And that helped to frame it for me to say, okay, yeah, I didn't start the business that created this wealth, and I could go do that. I could go find whatever that business is for me, or I can skip that step because it's already here, and then do a really good job of stewarding what is already before me. And then to take it to the next level of saying, of having the opportunity to look around and say, okay, my in-law, my siblings, um, they all have things that they're passionate about and they want to do. How can I aid them with this as well. I have always said, like, our choices will make these ripples through whatever we choose to do. If I can bring that family together and make some choices together, now it's some more mass that's falling into the pond and creating bigger ripples as they go out.
So you mentioned something which I'd like to get into a little bit more is the feeling of an inadequacy around wealth.
Mhm.
I think it's one of those taboo subjects that isn't spoken enough about, right? And there's an assumption that wealthy individuals and wealthy families have it easy, and the reality is wealth is a great divider. Wealth is prejudicial. A lot of folks are jealous of wealthy individuals and families, so they love to see them fall from grace, right? And at the same time, being part of a wealthy demographic, you're human too, and you've got these feelings of inadequacy, like we all have around different things.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
How have you dealt with that, addressed that with yourself and within the family? Because it's important for the listeners to realize that they're not alone in what they're feeling. It's normal.
Yeah. No, I would say one thing that helped me is taking the binary judgment of good and bad away. It is easy to say. I mean, and this is where I would have been prior to marrying into this family, is to say, if I zoom back to being 18, 19, 20, like, would it be great to line up a situation where, yeah, I get to marry into a wealthy family? Yeah, of course I'm going to determine, like, because if it's this or that, what the culture has told me is my life will be easier if that happens.
Right.
And I do, having married into a family with wealth, I would go back and tell that 19-year-old, like, you didn't know what you didn't know, and it can be crushing. There are pieces of it that, um things that before inaction just didn't have many consequences, or not understanding the dynamics of a certain account and how it has uh, ramifications on how you run that account, can end you up in legal jeopardy, or end you up in jail just because you didn't understand what. I mean, maybe that's extreme to say, but you can
But it's
definitely get
real.
into
It's real.
in trouble not knowing. A little anecdote I had recently: my brother-in-law asked me, um, he's working with a group that's a 501(c)(3), and they're trying to find a way to support the position he is doing, and he's like, well, could we just, you know, make a grant from my DAF into this 501(c)(3), and then they can pay me. And I'm like, no, that's tax fraud. Like, we can't do that. And so that's an example where it's like, that's not a ridiculous question. I mean, his understanding is that's what those funds are for, is for 501(c)(3) support. And here's a route. And so that's an example of, there's such a responsibility, even on the front end of education, that you can be so unaware of and end up in trouble because of making a decision that it seemed harmless to you at the time. And so
Right.
that's one side. And then the inadequacy piece is definitely something I had to wrestle with. Is like, okay, even within our broader family, I've watched other family members choose the different identity with the wealth, choose to say, you know what, I'm going to act like the wealth that was created before me doesn't exist, and I'm going to go work my tail off and create a business or an enterprise, or, and prove that I can create value. And that comes from somewhere. That drive comes from somewhere. And it's like, am I less noble or less valuable for saying, no, I'm just going to leverage what's already here? That's a question we have had within the family. It's just like, what is the most noble pursuit here? Like, is it to just kind of let the stuff that exists passively continue, and then go work hard to create new? There's other family members who've chosen to live off the passive thing. And so there's this kind of, we really do wrestle with this internally. What is the most noble pursuit? Because the family member that might be living more passively off of it is they're in the mornings and evenings and midday with their children, raising their kids. Like, is that the highest calling, is to raise the next generation? And that's an opportunity you've been given. So it's so funny to me, when I look back at how just I didn't have much wisdom around the binary nature of my judgment of wealth, if that makes sense.
Well, the thing, John, is there is no place that I'm aware of where family members can go and get emotionally prepared and equipped to manage the emotional challenges and baggage and burden that comes with the responsibility. Right?
That is so true. And that's been, I would say, in my job, the most stressful component of what I do every day is not the decisions to invest in this or that, or to move this here or there. Those are relatively easy to just look and measure risk and know that, yeah, we're not going to bat 1,000, but if we're making good decisions, we can do well. The stress comes from the conversations in the family systems about this didn't go as planned, and it impacted this person or that person in this way, and they don't want to bring that up because they don't want to sound greedy that the money didn't come quick enough. Like, all of that's where the stress is. And it's exactly what you're saying. There's no training for how to prepare to enter into those emotional conversations. Like, it's already enough to be in family systems that have their normal amount of dysfunction. Add this additional layer of financial wealth. It just kind of amplifies everything and turns it up to say, okay, I'm going to be more codependent about this, or I'm going to be more careful, or walk on what seems like sharper eggshells about this discussion.
That's the reason why we created 2 next-gen leadership programs called the Schoon and the Masai Project, which is really about bringing the inheritors of wealth into an environment where we'll get to explore and have the conversations about what does it mean to be wealthy. What does it mean to have a whole bunch of resources and be a steward of it? What does it mean to feel the shame and the guilt of it? So we create an environment for these individuals to speak with their peers. And what happens, John, is people go, oh, wow, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one going through this. And then we give them tools to be able to navigate through it. Because, the issue in families of wealth is, how do I, as a parent, one day prepare the children, whatever age they may be, to one day handle the wealth? And if you ask those parents, can you clearly articulate or put into practical terms and define what prepared is, they don't have an answer. The default is, well, we're going to send them to school, they're going to get an education. They're going to get a law degree and accounting degree. Okay, that's an education. We're going to send them to McDonald's. Well, that's work ethic. That's working with people. But the emotional side is not addressed enough.
Yeah,
so
I couldn't agree more there.
What family to deal with?
Yeah, that I couldn't agree more. That is an area that just there's not much preparation for. This is where I say it's kind of the perfect storm when I married into this family. I come from a background where emotional intelligence, or really a high value, is placed on introspection, emotional intelligence, and then therapy, going to therapy. And so that wasn't the case in the family I married into. And so that was something that I got to bring in. And a lot of times that's a pretty taboo subject, because especially in a wealthy family, we don't need therapy. That means we're dysfunctional. It's like,
something
okay,
wrong with it. Well,
yeah,
you're a human being, so you are.
Exactly.
Okay.
Like,
You're just
let's start right
that's all.
there. Let's just bring the humility in that, like, look around, you can tell things are dysfunctional. But to take it the next step to say, okay, how can we do this in an encouraging and safe and fostering way? One of the things we did is I took a book that is a good kind of base level language to be able to discuss the emotional components of what's going on in any circumstance. We read that as a fan, or we kind of gave the book to everybody. It's a 200 pages or less book. and then checked in and said, hey, is everybody through it? Because we're scheduling a workshop that's going to come up that we're going to get together. And we actually had a team come in and walk through now taking what the book gave in head knowledge about feelings and discussions around that and turn it into practice. And then in between there was like a workbook that the facilitators actually had us do, which took the head knowledge and applied it to the stories in somebody's life. So they were able to take those different chapters from the book and say, okay, this one is on shame. So let's talk about moments in your life where shame was very present, or you experienced shame very strongly. And this workbook, I'd kind of say, like, the head was reading the book, the heart was tying it to your story through this workbook, and then doing this workshop took us through the practice of how to engage. And now we use that every day in our staff meetings, or not every day, every week in our staff meetings. We do these emotional check-ins to start the conversation. And then it is just the culture of our office that if something seems sideways, the first thing we can do is check in there. And it creates an environment of empathy and understanding that when that is what the culture around us is, it pervades the atmosphere. It's a little easier to deal with the stressful moments that really they feel emotional, but it's really a circumstance. And so it's how are we responding emotionally? And yeah, that's the short answer of how we do that as a family.
Fantastic. So you guys are really focusing on the human capital side of the equation. Because
Yeah,
at the end of the day, that's the most valuable asset class any family has.
I absolutely agree. We when the family laid out their goals, or the kind of mission for the family office, one of the things was, generosity comes first, then education, and then our, service or investment management. And we then reframed generosity not just as external but internal. And so helping the family to understand exactly what you said is, we're only as good as our team is. And so if we're stringing out our team, just trying to wring them dry of all the potential they have, and not being a place where they can feel safe and filled up, we're not going to get the best outcome for our business. And so that's why we said we need to turn this internal first. We have to be generous towards each other. And that's, in many different ways. That's not just, we give good vacation time, or it's saying, hey, something's going on in your life, to this staff member. How can the office maybe like help support you as you go work through that?
That's amazing. That's fabulous. So we've come to the top of the hour, as I knew we would, John. Time flew by. So I always like to ask our guests the same question. So it's the same question for the senior or current generation and the next gen. And the question is, what's one piece of advice you can offer from your perspective as a spouse marrying into the family business? The other side is, what's the advice you can offer welcoming spouses in to this sort of cliquey little club called Family of Wealth?
Yeah, great question. So the advice I'd offer to somebody in my shoes marrying in is to do the work of introspection, to do the work of understanding what's going on inside of you. As I've done that work, it's helped me to have a more empathic approach to the family members that I'm, or the members of the family I'm married into. And it's an attractant as well. That the humility to be able to do that yourself only attracts humility for others to do that. So, and then from the other side, maybe that is the answer. And in that is just, everybody is fighting a battle every day in their life, and we would love to put on a spectrum of ease to difficulty, but the reality is that each person is in that on their own. And so I love what you said earlier. I think one of the most powerful feelings that doesn't get much attention is feeling less lonely. We talk a lot about feeling lonely, but the feeling of feeling less lonely is so powerful, because it means you're feeling known, and you feel like you know somebody. And so I genuinely believe that that's what most of us just we want, that is to know and be known. And so in the context of marrying into a family or somebody marrying into your family is is look first at them as a fellow human, not as whatever they are in the business or the family. And then from there you can build such a great foundation to go, you know, to whatever the next step is.
That's lovely piece of advice. John, thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciate your wisdom, your candor, and your generosity. Really, really
Well,
inspiring.
thank you. I appreciate the time and willingness to try to draw out if I had anything valuable to offer. So
So if people wanted to reach out and learn more about you and what you've done, and maybe about the book you guys use, where do they find you?
Probably the best place would be on LinkedIn. We're still so early in our journey. I wish I could send you to our website, but that there's not much there at the moment. So my full name, John Michael Elder, on LinkedIn would be probably the best place to connect. And happy to pass those tools on. They were massive for our family, and we've already had other families use them and love them as well.
That's fantastic. So listeners, as you know, our guests volunteer their time, are generous with their wisdom and expertise and experiences. So please, share the podcast because it's designed for the community of you, so you don't feel as lonely as you have in the past. You can feel, as to use John's words, less lonely. Right? We all want to have a sense of community and belonging, and we created this podcast for that very reason. So if something speaks to you, let us know what spoke to you. What did you like? What did you hear? But most importantly, share with your friends so they're not as lonely as you were in the past. John, thank you so much.
Thank you.